The night I was born, my mom was sorting punch cards, right? So I've been learning about business since the day I was born. When I think about long-term strategy, it's not just product strategy, it's not just marketing and distribution strategy, it's the people strategy. You know, how do you get to be a company of 1,000 employees and have a stronger culture than you did when you were 2 employees? Always know that the buck stops with the CEO. So don't take the title if you're not willing to take the role.
Today, I have Rene Lacerte as a guest on Why in the Valley. Rene is the CEO founder of Bill.com, which is valued at around $10 billion, with over 100,000 small businesses using their platform. Bill.com is a fintech platform that puts the back office into the back pocket of small businesses. In short, they help businesses pay and get paid. I have known Rene over the years. I'm proud that YML has played a small part in their long journey. We talk about growing up as a 4th-generation entrepreneur, the myth of overnight success, and building lasting company culture, especially during accelerated growth. Rene, welcome to Why in the Valley.
Thank you for having us, Ashish. Good to see you again.
Same here. And you know, we want to unpack a lot today. Your journey from stuffing envelopes for your dad to building a $10 billion company, Bill.com. I remember we worked together for a few years in the middle, and it was such a hyper growth phase for Bill.com that I remember a couple of times I ended up in the wrong address because you guys were moving so fast in Palo Alto. So, you know, want to go through some of those moments as well. And Rene, I've seen like how you've built Bill.com on the sidelines, and I absolutely admire what you have done.
Thank you.
I reached out to a common contact, and you know this person really well. And this is what he has to say about you. Rene is a delightful mix of smart as can be, a true culture builder, aggressively focused on winning, and constantly helping his team be their very best selves. And I have worked with Rene over 20 years, backing him up. Who do you think this is?
David Hornick.
There you go, man. It was so easy. So would love to know, what does Bill.com do?
We automate the back office, the financial operations that are the bane of existence for every business. So when you think about paying the bills and getting paid by your customers, there's just a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of money movement. There's a lot of integration with your accounting systems. And we take all of that mess, which it's lots of paper, lots of sticky notes, lots of checks, lots of fraud and security risk. We take all of that and just make it a very simple process that, as you helped us with, can be done from your phone. So the back office in the back pocket, right? And that is something that I think enables the business owners to really get back to doing what they love. And, you know, it's kind of, you know, less stress and more business. And I think it's really important for a business owner to really not be held back by, you know, these mundane tasks. They really need to be able to think about how they're going to grow their company and do what they want to do, and not, you know, Saturday night worrying about who do you pay and where's the cash coming from and so on and so forth.
So in short, helping small business get paid and pay their bills. So you come from a family of entrepreneurs, and I would love to know how that has influenced your entrepreneurial journey over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting growing up with all the stories. So I'm a 4th generation. Go back to my great grandfather who had a general store, and then my grandfather that had probably, 7 or 8 businesses throughout his life, and he was a consummate salesperson, and he could just you know, start a business and make it work. And then when he was either tired of it or he'd run out of market opportunity, he'd go on to the next opportunity. And so, you know, hearing that story, and then, you know, my dad kind of followed suit, and my dad had, you know, half a dozen businesses with my mom that they built together. And seeing that, you know what, if you have a passion, you have a dream, you can make it come to life, it just becomes reaffirming. And there were plenty of ups and downs, right? None of it was up and to the right all the time. There were plenty of Christmases where we got lots of great presents. There were plenty of Christmases where there wasn't as much under the tree, right? And so you see that the ebb and the flow is worth it because you end up building something that is lasting, right? And I think, growing up in a family where you believe, you make happen what you believe in, that can-do attitude and that willingness to take a risk and have some failure. If my grandfather had 8 businesses, 6 of them he closed down,
Wow.
right? So, and they were successful and then he closed them for whatever reason. Sometimes he was bored, sometimes the market dried up or whatever. And so you have to be willing to accept that type of risk, and just be all out committed to doing it. And so, like I said, the number of hours that they worked, the passion they had around it, the dinner table conversations, it was something that you could see kind of lit up, my parents, my grandparents' eyes. They just really liked helping other people through the structure of what business is.
So I'm guessing you went to Stanford and then you stayed back in the Bay Area. Is that what happened?
No. So one of the questions that I think is interesting in life is, why do you end up where you're at?
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's not the resume. Don't read me the resume. Don't tell me you did this and you did this. Like, what are the moments that change? And so I had an undergraduate degree in economics and a graduate degree in engineering. And so I was talking to consulting firms, I was talking to investment banking firms, I was talking to companies like HP, and none of it really seemed exciting. But I went to one of the sessions with Price Waterhouse, and there was a partner there named David Sweet. And he asked me kind of my life story, kind of what you just asked, and kind of talked about the entrepreneurship in the family. And he said, look, I think you ought to go into accounting because the language of business is accounting. And it seems like you're going to be an entrepreneur someday and you should understand accounting. And that literally, that 30 seconds, like, wow, that makes sense. And so then we had the conversation, like, what do you think I should do in accounting? So we should go and audit. Because in audit, you get a chance to see all the different clients out there. I said I wanted to be back east, closer to family. And he said, the best office in the East Coast is Philadelphia, the most diverse economy. If you go to New York, it's all financial services. If you go south, it's, whatever. But Philadelphia had a lot of diversity in the economy. So I worked on companies as big and old as Campbell Soup and DuPont, and companies as small as, somebody who sold carpet, but also worked on biomedical companies. I worked on Intelligent Electronics, which was kind of the precursor to, a Fry's, if you will, the national version of it, right? So lots of different opportunities to learn, and that's why I ended up in Philadelphia. After 4 years, I missed the West Coast. I said, I want to come back. So
Okay. And so after PwC, I would love to know what between PwC and PayCycle, like what was the journey like?
Well, the first thing I did after a few years in audit, I ended up going into computer consulting at PwC. And then my dad had started, probably his 5th company, and it was a payroll company. And he was looking for an engineer, and I talked him into letting him hire me to come and kind of switch careers as a transition. So I went down there and helped him for a couple of years in Florida, and then came out to California. And one thing led to another, and decided to actually go work at Intuit to help them launch their payroll product. Now that was 94, 95. And at the same time, Intuit was launching its consumer bill payment product, which took off. And Intuit didn't have anybody that actually knew what the acronym ACH really meant back then. And it was, new for a lot of people, but I'd been doing a lot of payroll and a lot of ACH transactions, so I understood the money movement system of the country. And so I got involved in consumer bill payment, did some work there, ended up launching a bill presentment effort that Intuit had. But then after a few years, really thought and wanted to go pursue and help Intuit with payroll. So then I did, launch their Do It With You approach, which is, kind of a big part of their business today. The do it yourself and the do it with you were things that I launched as part of Intuit. And then after a few years, it was 99 and everybody was starting companies. And I thought, hey, maybe I'll go try. So, and so that's why I started PayCycle, which was the first online payroll company. And after about 6 years of running that, had this idea for Bill.com and stayed on the board at PayCycle, but then started Bill.com to kind of really take advantage of the cloud and really automate financial operations.
Yeah, I would unpack a little more of PayCycle. I understand you started, and then how was the experience and what was the transition from PayCycle to Bill.com for you?
Yeah, so I started it with a co-founder, a guy named Martin Gates, wonderful person. And I think one of the things that is always a challenge when you have, co-founding relationships is it's pretty easy to do the stuff that you agree on and pretty hard to do the stuff you don't agree on, right? And so we agreed on a fair bit, and we're running the business with that. We brought in one of the board members we had. We brought him in as a COO. And so now we kind of had three people that were in a box that needed to agree on things. And so eventually that led to some opportunities where we didn't agree, and we weren't doing a great job of making those decisions as a team. So the board kind of stepped in and asked me to step down and hire a CEO that could make those calls. And so that was in the fall of, I guess, probably 2004. And then I stayed on for another 18 months, hired the new CEO and trained him. And so, it wasn't a surprise to me because we'd been going through a number of conversations, and I could see that we weren't getting to a consensus around consensus even, right? And so I knew the board was going to have a challenge in standing behind that. But, a lot of things learned from that. And, some of the first learning was, driving home from the board meeting where they kind of had given me the news that they thought it was time for me to step down.
Was that a shock for you, or?
It wasn't a terrible shock because, like I said, we'd hired a consultant probably 6 months before to kind of help understand the roles and responsibilities that each of us would take to kind of get to more streamlined, traditional, if you will, CEO role. And there was an agreement, when we got to the final roles. And I even said to the other folks that I did not think the board was going to accept this, and that the most likely outcome would be exactly what ended up happening. So it wasn't a shock. Like, I kind of saw this coming, but it always feels like a surprise when it happens. But it was something I was prepared for. My wife, was a VC, and so when she told me that I was being called in for an unscheduled board meeting, she kind of let me know what was really going on. So when I walked in the next day, I kind of knew. And I even, offered up different ways that we could try to, resurrect, my leadership. And it was, unfortunately, it's not the right phrase, but too little too late, right? But anyways, driving, from August Capital, driving down 280, it was raining, it was November, one of the first rains. And, just as I kind of crest the hill before I take the turn to go into PayCycle's offices, the clouds break and the sun comes out. And on the radio is Jimmy Cliff's "I Can See Clearly Now. The rain has stopped." And so the moment is very real because it was at that moment that I was thinking, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to make this work for PayCycle. If it doesn't work to the way I want for myself, I can always go start Bill.com. And in that moment, I started thinking about the things I would do differently in my leadership. And one of them was to always, always know that the buck stops with the CEO. So don't take the title if you're not willing to take the role, right? And so that was, even when you have founders, co-founders and stuff like that, that has to be very clear that, ultimately there is one decision maker and there can't be consensus. And so, that's one of the harder things to accept as a leader. And some of the examples, on that are, at PayCycle, I don't think, in the 7 years that I was there and 6 years I was CEO, I don't think I ever asked somebody to leave the company. We're 14 years in, and unfortunately, I've had to ask people to leave the company. But, out of all the people that have come and left the company, I'm still friends with all of them. And so I've made a commitment to always be direct and honest and to make sure folks understood, why I was making a decision. They don't have to agree with it, but at least they can understand it. And that's led to an ability to maintain, the friendships that I had or developed. And I think not shying away from that responsibility. It's just one example. There's so many examples like that throughout a CEO's decision-making process. I mean, it's every day. There are lots of decisions that you make, and you just have to own that responsibility and not assume somebody else is going to make it or that it's not going to come back to haunt you. Like, these are the things that happen. If you don't do it today, you'll pay the price later and have a bigger problem to fix then.
Most of the people think, they look at you, they're like, oh, Rene built a $10 billion company and he's overnight success. It's pretty much like,
it took you 20 years to become like an overnight success, and that is a perspective a lot of people miss. And I believe that when you were building Bill.com, the early phase was very challenging. You got a lot of rejection. I remember that in our case, like building YML, we got rejected like close to 22 times by VCs and investors. And at that point, I was so frustrated. I just went the route of bootstrapping for a few years. And then, in 2015, we sold part of the company, all those things. But in your case, I feel that after you got rejection, you had one investor who stuck out and invested in you, and would love to know more during that early phase of Bill.com.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go back to your point on the 20 years, I mean, anyone's, experience today is some of the experiences they've had over their life, right? So, the night I was born, my mom was sorting punch cards, right? So I've been learning about business since the day I was born. And I would say, the real learning started, once I started running PayCycle. And, that first funding, which happened to be Hornick, there were 95 VCs that I talked to before I got David. There were two that were interested. David moved a little faster, so he got the deal. I'm not sure the other one would have gotten their partnership over the hump. And by the way, that was because of the implosion of the .com implosion. That was the last investment that August Capital made for 2 or 3 years. So it really was good timing that I managed to get David's support. But then you fast forward. We just talked about the transition from me out of PayCycle and stepping down. Everybody who put money into PayCycle put money into Bill.com.
Nice.
And so I think that's one of the things that I've learned. And persistence, you talked about persistence. I learned that from my parents, especially my dad, that you just kind of stick with it. You just stick with the things and keep working at it. If you believe in it, it'll come together. And so in this case, like, I managed to maintain all the relationships with the board members. And as I was starting Bill.com, they were quite anxious to kind of, have a chance to work together again. And I would be very direct about what I was going to do different as a leader and stuff like that. So I think the early days of Bill.com, again, timing is kind of, a huge part of life. I started in 2006. We opened the doors September of 2006. We went to demo, if you remember the demo conference. Went to demo in September 2007. And we started putting customers on the platform in January of 2008. And then, you fast forward and you get to, September, October 2008, and the Sequoia deck goes out with the spiral of death on the cover. And winter is coming, and all these nasty things. And you read the deck and the economic data, and it was actually pretty hard to dispute. And so, I made a decision to save the company because I had cash until about March, April of 2009. I made a decision to lay off 40% of the team. So we were 26 employees. We went down to 15. And it turned out that was the right decision. It was really a hard decision. We cried together. We ate pizza together after I explained, pretty much the economic environment. But then you fast forward, we raised money in September 2009. So there would have been about 6 months where I didn't have capital, which with 15 employees, it would have been very hard to bootstrap. We didn't have, people would have had to go without salary, and it would have been a hard time to really ask people to do that. So it was, definitely a challenging time. But then you get through that, and then we actually after 2009, we've been able to raise capital whenever we wanted to raise capital, and so that part's nice.
And how did you acquire the first 100 customers? Because that, I would imagine, would be the toughest.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I'll talk about PayCycle a little bit too, because both examples are the people get you the first 5 or 10, right? I mean, it really is around, okay, who do you know? And it was a little bit easier with Bill.com because I got to know a lot of accountants through PayCycle. And the PayCycle brand with accountants was exceptionally strong. And so I was able to, reach out to a handful of accountants, and they were able to put on a handful of clients and give feedback and learning. In the Valley, I was able to reach out to a handful of friends, or even some of the VCs I knew, and get another 10 or 15 clients. So it was, it's always the part that's the hardest, is just to get the snowball, momentum building. But I think the network is always something that helps. So,
And what was the kind of business, of small business, early on you were targeting?
well, we built the platform from day one to serve all businesses, all segments, broad horizontal platform to help SMBs manage their financial operations. So we did not care about what industry they're in. Part of the platform includes an ability to brand and have a grouped experience, if you will, for accounts so they can manage multiple clients. And so it was really, and we saw that happening early on. We had, customers coming from all different segments. The accountants, are stuck with the proverbial shoebox with all their clients. Hey, fix this, get this data in the books. I don't want to deal with it. I want to go run my business. So they were taking all of that. They were going around. A lot of the early accounts, they would drive around to their accounting offices, to their clients' offices to pick up paper. And then they bring the paper back and scan it. Some of them would even have the paper FedExed so they could actually take care of the data entry and the scanning and enter the bills, right? So all of that became pretty advantageous, when we were able to kind of help. And, it was fun, because then we were back to doing what I did as a kid, which was stuffing checks in the back office, right? Stuffing the mail and mailing it and tracking it and all that type of stuff.
And I remember that we worked with a lot of startups early on: Credit Karma, Latch, Clover. I wish I had taken all my fees and equity. That would have been a different story. So during the whole building the startup phase, there has to be a point when you feel like this is no longer an experiment. This has stuck. You've kind of hit a tipping point. What was that point or moment for you?
For me, it was before we even had customers. So what I didn't share about the fall 2008, that was a hard time for us with letting employees go. In September of 2008, my dad passed away from lung cancer. And I was going back to Florida every 3 weeks. He was diagnosed in February. And so every 3 weeks I was going back to Florida to, hang out with him and help out, with any of the things I could help with. But I got a chance to show him the demo of the product. And, when I showed him, the demo of the product, and I'd been telling what I was doing. And when I showed it to him, I think maybe we had 3 or 4 customers on the platform. It was maybe March of 2008. He just turned to me and he said, "Holy, F, Rene, I can't believe you came up with this. This is so broad and it covers so many things. I know where you're going with it. It's going to take time, but this is really cool." And so, he said it not because he was, my dad. You could tell he said it as a business person that built product. He got what I was trying to build. And so I had a lot of respect for him. So when I heard that, I'm like, okay, I got to stick with this one. And he knew, he was well aware of PayCycle, and we would talk about that. And that was interesting to him, but not like, this is like, wow, you came up with something that I never would have thought of, and yet it's so needed. And so that's when I knew that we had something and that I just needed to keep being persistent and keep working on it.
Over the years, what were some of the experiments, you have run? And what is the framework of how you decide, this is the new product we launch, and this is the product we are going to kill, and this is how we'll pivot the roadmap? How does that work?
Yeah, I've always had a strong team, and the team does a great job every year of setting aside a roadmap that we discuss, and there's lots of experimentation that we encourage. I would say that one of the things that's interesting is, in many ways, scale begets scale, right? As you get bigger, you have more opportunities to experiment, more opportunities to think about things that can really accelerate growth. And so I would say in the early days, it was all, not all, I would say a fair bit was just spent thinking about the robustness of the platform. We know that we want to be able to do and this. We're only going to do this right now, but the platform has to be able to do all these things. And, examples of that would be white labeling to a bank, on the same platform that serves customers, through an accountant or serves customers directly. We knew that because of distribution, we'd want to serve SMBs with no employees up to SMBs with 500 or 1,000 employees, right? If it fit our product. We knew we'd want to sync with any of the accounting packages. So the early days would have been around the foundation. And, the CTO, Eric Chan, is out of Salesforce. So we spent a lot of time talking about kind of the foundation, the database design, and the structure so that we could do these types of things. And, sometimes, and we're doing more now, that structure was probably too visible to our customers. It wasn't as easy as it needs to be for them, right? And so we're spending a lot of time now. The UX team is the fastest growing team in the company that is doing the design work to kind of hide that infrastructure. But that infrastructure enables us to do a lot more experimentation today. So I would say in the early days, there wasn't as much experimentation. It was like, we just got to build this platform, got to make sure it works, got to make sure it scales. And, over the last few years, we have been doing more experimentation. We've launched 2 new products that have been really successful driving revenue for us: international payments and virtual card payments. Both of those, I think one of them went from board presentation to revenue in 12 months, and the other one was 6 months. So, we feel pretty good about that, and they've become good parts of the business today. And if you go 3 years out, they're driving strong revenue growth for us. And so we have experiments like that, going on across the company, but we're now adding this layer of experimentation into the user experience, if you will. And we're looking holistically at the user experience from everything, from that starts with marketing all the way through the customer support experience that a customer gets and everything in between. So sales, product, and customer success, trying to have a holistic view of that user experience and making sure that customers don't have to see, the sausage making, if you will. But, we can make a lot of sausage.
So over the past, almost 11, 12 years now, right? What are like the key chapters of your role as the founder CEO, right? Like, almost feel like you may be on version number X, over the years. So what were some of the big chapters?
Yeah. So, the first is really all about the vision and getting the foundation right. So, and the vision is both for the product and the culture. And that's probably, let's say the first 1,000 customers, right? There's a lot of hands-on, a lot of talking to customers, a lot of talking to employees, a lot of, rolling up the sleeves. Not coding, I wasn't coding anymore, but having a lot of good conversations around that. And, then you fast forward, there was this thing with 2008 where I realized my responsibility as a CEO was to make these hard decisions, with the financial crisis. But let's say we hit the 1,000 customer mark by 2009, 2010. And so then it really became thinking a little bit further out. Not does this work? It's okay, what's going to be next? And, thinking about capital and allocation and resources became a little bit more important part of the job. Thinking about partnerships, because we were ready to go get some partnerships. So then I would say, first part is really building. Next part, you still build, but now you got to think about selling. So I was doing more selling to partners. And then, you kind of get enough scale. And the next phase is when I changed my title from founder and CEO to CEO and founder. and it's a subtle change, and most people probably don't notice it. But for me, it was, no, I am now a hired CEO. The founder part, it's not ever done.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of, I think, what I bring to the CEO role. But there's a responsibility that, a CEO has. I can't be wedded 100% to stuff that I was wedded to as the founder. I have to say, what do I think is right for the business today, for the shareholders we have, for the employees we have. I still carry that vision, but it can't be the only thing I carry. So that was the shift for me. And, that led to probably, the next shift was, okay, how big can this really be? And thinking about the team that I assembled around me and always, either coaching the team or evolving the team, right? I mean, like I said, I mean, we've had, 3 or 4 leaders for each of the functions that, report to me today. And that's, been really important to actually be thinking about where are we going. As a public company CEO, and the last phase would just be the public company, just really thinking about that long-term strategy more. And when I think about long-term strategy, it's not just product strategy, it's not just marketing distribution strategy, it's the people strategy. How do you get to be a company of 1,000 employees and have a stronger culture than you did when you were 2 employees?
Yep. Yep.
That's the goal, right?
And plus, like when you're 2 employees, it's easier to manage the culture because founder is the culture, right? Like, and when you're 1,000, you need replica and ambassadors, in the company who are influencing the culture, because obviously one person cannot just influence the culture at that level, which is a perfect segue. I remember, Rene, like this was, I think, year 2015. You invited us in your all hands, to showcase the app and stuff. And I was absolutely blown away the kind of recognition you gave us in your all hands. And I learned so much in that all hands myself, as a CEO founder, that how recognition is so much important, in such a big forum. And when you're like pushing the team and they're doing so well and they're working hard, I think recognition plays like a big role to make sure, they're grounded and they're focused and so on and so forth. So how does this process of building culture at Bill.com, right? What has helped you build culture at Bill.com, and what is the culture looks like today?
Yeah, it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I'll just take a little bit of a step back. So we all grew up in a family that has a culture, and if you were to think about the family you grew up in or the family that you have today, what are the values that are unique to that family? Now, families don't write those down. I actually did ask my kids, and we wrote ours down. And sometimes I think, they're like, Dad, but other times it's kind of nice to see. But anyways, you leave that experience where there are values, they're just unwritten. I go to a boarding school in Connecticut, which has the values in the stained glass windows: temperantia, fiducia, constantia, self-reliance, simplicity of life, and directness of purpose. And so that had an impression. It's been 40 years now, and I still have that stained glass. I mean, it's there. I think about that stuff every day, and I try to make sure that I live by those things. I think they're pretty strong, foundational. So then you fast forward, you go to college. I didn't really see any values that were kind of demonstrated there. I worked at Price Waterhouse, didn't see any values. It wasn't a thing that companies did back then. My parents' company, we didn't have that. And then I landed at Intuit. And Intuit back then had 10 values. Scott had taken the whole company through the values, and it was a whole company exercise, right? I wasn't there when it was done. It was right before I joined. But there were 10 values, and there was not a manifesto, but it was, there was a document that kind of really talked about how they wanted to, kind of live and give back to the world. And it was, it impressed me. And so that when I started PayCycle, I said, okay, let's have 5 values. 10's too many. Nobody can remember them. And so we whittled it down to 5. Many of them were similar to Intuit's. But then as I ran the company, I didn't find the values to be helpful in running the company. So one of the examples, let's say, is integrity. There was something around integrity that both companies had. It wasn't helpful to, to me, I'll get to that in a second. Another was, balanced lives for employees. Another one was something around employees first, or customers first or something like that, customer driven. And these are all things that you should do, right? I'm not saying these are bad things to do, but they didn't help me lead. Of course I want those things. Of course I want my employees to have balanced lives. Of course I want us to feel customers, that we feel that they're first.
Yep.
And so I started thinking a lot about it in 2002 and 3 before I started PayCycle. And I was not a good person when it came to calculus. I was not good at calculus, but I was impressed with the concept that a function, a formula, could describe how water flows down a mountain. And that's the whole derivative process, right? And so I became obsessed about what are the derivative values that can help leaders lead. not, help leaders do X, help leaders lead. And ultimately, what I settled on were these five values. And the company did get, I think they're a little bit different than I first started with. It's in the company's words. But these five values are all around what makes a team great. So it's not in any particular order, but, we're humble, which is why when you guys did great work, I'm going to say, Why Media did great work. Come on, everybody, give them a round of applause, right? Yeah. We're authentic, which is also why I'm going to say I got to pat Ashish and his team on the back, because it's them. We're passionate. We want everybody to experience and do what they love to do. And so I need to be passionate about setting a strategy, but I need engineers to be passionate about writing code and being part of a team that they enjoy working with. We're dedicated to each other and to our customers, and we like to have fun together. But if you think those as colors and a palette, if you will, what I tell every employee is these are the colors, the palette that I want you to go paint a canvas with. And I'm not going to tell you what to paint, just go paint. And I think sometimes corporate values are telling people what to paint. And just here are the colors we want you to paint with.
Yeah.
Go be yourself. And so that's been a huge part of how I think about it. And it's how we have awards every quarter where we acknowledge people that are demonstrating those values so we can highlight them. Obviously, it's in the hiring process, you're asked about them. I do a boot camp where I talk about them. And it is something that we do spend a fair bit of time saying, how are we doing against that? But to me, it's the foundational stuff that allows for decisions later. It's not something that is pointing a direction. It's like we're going to have people. To me, it gets back to the people. We're going to have people that have these five things in common. And that will build a great company. And that company will change from time to time. Now, one of the other things that we do to augment that is, as a leader, the leadership team every year comes up with principles that we think we need as a team to build, competencies, if you will, to build. And sometimes they stay for a couple of years. So one of them we've been working on for a while is radical candor. And that's one that you may always need to work on. People always hold their punches back. And so it's important that you find a way not to hold the punch back in a way that's conductive and really helpful for growth.
So during this phase right now, the current phase, you're growing so fast, there is always this tension between sometimes teams are running way too fast because the business growth is there. If they don't, then how will the business grow so fast? All those things. How do you kind of balance between the two, right? Where the team is not burnt out, but at the same time, you're running the business very aggressively.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a coach since I started PayCycle. I did not have one since I started Bill. I did not have one at PayCycle. And lots of things, and I'll have to go through all the notes someday, but lots of learnings from those conversations. And one of them, I used to consistently talk about just feeling bad about, how much I worked. And one day, his name was Richard. I go in and I say, "Hey, Richard, I figured it out." It's like, "What?" It's like, "I love to work, and that's fun for me. So I'm not going to feel bad about it anymore." I mean, if you wanted to talk Game of Thrones, I could say winter's coming. That's all I know about it, right? I don't watch TV. I watch a little bit of Star Trek, but I don't really watch TV. I read books about growing as a CEO, but I don't read a lot other than that, right? So for me, I love work, so the reason for this is you have to step back and say, well, what are the important things? And so there's an analogy, I can't remember where I learned this, but a professor comes in, let's say it's an engineering school, let's say it's MIT, right? One of the best engineering schools, comes in and has a big old jar and it's full of rocks, pretty big rocks like this big or whatever. And he says to the class, "Is the jar full?" And everybody's like, "It's absolutely full." So then he puts in some pebbles. "Is it full?" "Oh yeah, it's full now, professor." Then he pulls out a bag of sand, fills it up with sand. "Is it full?" "Yes, it's full." Then he pours in the water. And he's like, the whole point is, if you don't put the big rocks in, you don't get to put the smaller rocks, you don't get to put the sand in, you don't get to put the water in, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, the big rocks are my family. What does my family need from me as a dad, as a husband? What do they need, first and foremost? Myself, my health. I exercise every day. If I feel that I don't need to work right now, I don't work. Most of the time, I like work.
Yeah.
But what that means is the last big rock is work, and it ends up being the biggest. And yet all these other things I think are taken care of, right? And I'm satisfied and I'm happy. And so when you talk about burnout, my advice is always make sure you understand what your rocks are. If you understand what your big rocks are and you take care of them first, we'll be very happy if you give us whatever is left over, because it's still going to be plenty, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be in a much better spot. Like I had my run this morning and it was a beautiful morning and I'm like, it's a great freaking day, right? And I did that. That means all day long, no matter what shit comes my way, I can be like, I had a run in.
Okay, this brings us to our last segment, something we call the sprint. It's rapid fire. So I'm going to give you two options and you choose the one that resonates most with you.
And this can be easy, this can be hard, no explanation required, but it gets pretty interesting, okay? People or process?
People.
Musk or Bezos?
Bezos.
PayPal or Square?
Square.
Bitcoin or Dogecoin?
Neither. That's probably the point.
And Apple or Google?
Apple.
The last one, AI or blockchain?
AI.
All right. Well, Rene, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Hope, we can connect soon. Are you meeting people? What's your status right now?
I'm doing plenty of outdoor drinking of wine.
Okay.
So if you want to grab a glass of wine somewhere,
absolutely,
that
man.
would be great.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. Rene, I appreciate your time, and this was lovely.
Well, thank you, Ashish. Great questions, and look forward to hearing it online. Thanks for all the time, and thanks for all the support. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in and listening. You can find Why in the Valley wherever you get your podcasts, available now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more.